Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some new moms struggle with feeling down after birth, and if the birth experience itself is the main culprit? Well, today we're diving into some fascinating research that looks at just that, and it offers a slightly different idea for why these feelings might pop up. So imagine this: a study by Aker and their colleagues looked at new moms and found that how positively or negatively they felt about their birth experience seemed to influence their postpartum depressive symptoms. They also thought that the way moms think about things, this thing called rumination, played a big role in between. Basically, they suggested that a tough birth experience could lead to more rumination. And that rumination then increased the chances of feeling depressed after the baby arrives. Birth satisfaction, on the other hand, they thought acted like a shield, protecting moms from these negative feelings. It is a pretty common sense idea, right? A bad experience leads to bad thoughts, which lead to feeling bad. But here is where it gets interesting. Our researchers today, Sorjonen, Melin, and Melin, looked at the same information, the same data, but they thought about it a little differently. They said, okay, correlation doesn't equal causation. That is a big one in science. Just because two things happen together doesn't automatically mean one caused the other. Think about it. Ice cream sales go up in the summer, and so do shark attacks. Does eating ice cream cause shark attacks? No way. There is likely a third factor, like warmer weather, that influences both. So, Sorjonen and colleagues wondered if there might be another explanation for the link between birth experiences and postpartum depression. They suggested that maybe, just maybe, there is something underlying both of these things. They called it a latent general vulnerability factor. Now, latent just means something that is not directly measured but can be inferred from other things we can measure. And general vulnerability suggests a predisposition, a general tendency to experience difficulties, whether it is related to the birth or to mood. They created a new model, a different way of looking at the data. Instead of seeing birth experience as the cause and rumination as the messenger, they proposed that this general vulnerability factor might actually be the driver. They figured that this underlying vulnerability could influence how satisfied a mom feels with her birth experience. So, if a mom is generally more vulnerable, she might be more likely to feel less satisfied with her birth, even if objectively it wasn't terrible. And this lower birth satisfaction, in turn, could then lead to more rumination and subsequently to postpartum depressive symptoms. Let's break that down super simply. Imagine some people are just naturally more prone to seeing the negative side of things or to getting stuck in worrying thoughts. This is our general vulnerability. Sorjonen and colleagues proposed that this underlying vulnerability might make a mom feel less happy with her birth experience. And it's not necessarily that the birth caused the low satisfaction, but that her existing vulnerability shaped her perception of the birth. And this lower satisfaction then might lead to that cycle of rumination and feeling down. They use statistical tools, specifically structural equation modeling, which is like building complex logical chains, to see how different factors relate to each other. They found that their alternative model fit the data really well, almost as well as the original model. In fact, with a small tweak, where they allowed the feelings about traumatic birth and depressive symptoms to be a bit more directly linked, their model fit even better. This suggests that their idea of a general vulnerability factor is a strong contender for explaining the observed connections. What does this mean practically? Well, Aker et al. Suggested that focusing on improving the birth experience and managing rumination might be key to preventing postpartum depression. Sorjonen and colleagues aren't saying that is wrong, but they're saying we need to consider the bigger picture. Maybe the focus shouldn't only be on the birth event itself, but also on factors that contribute to a general sense of vulnerability. This could mean looking at a woman's history, her coping mechanisms, her support systems, and other personal traits that might make her more susceptible to feeling distressed. This is a really important point about how science works. One study comes up with a conclusion, and then other researchers dig deeper, consider alternative explanations, and help us get a more complete picture. It is like detective work. The first clue might point one way, but further investigation might reveal a more complex truth. The key takeaway here is that when you see a study, especially if it is observational data, it is always good to remember that there might be other ways to interpret the findings. So, what does all this mean for you? If you are a new mom or expecting and you are feeling anxious about birth, or if you are experiencing postpartum depression, remember that your birth experience is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. It is totally valid to feel whatever you are feeling, and if you are struggling, reaching out for support is crucial. This research suggests that understanding your own personal tendencies, your general resilience, might be just as important as reflecting on the birth itself. It highlights the need for a holistic approach, one that considers both life events and individual predispositions. This study doesn't give us all the answers, and that is okay. Science is an ongoing process. Future research could explore these general vulnerability factors more directly. What exactly makes up this vulnerability? How can we measure it reliably? And can interventions that target this underlying vulnerability be effective in preventing postpartum depression long before the birth even happens? Looking at the interplay between personality, life events, and mental health is incredibly complex and deeply human. So remember to be a critical consumer of information, especially when it comes to health and psychology. There are often multiple layers to the story. That is all for today's episode of RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you found this helpful, give us a like, leave a comment with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive. See you next time.